Professor Wergely's here working through this serialization example. We just got done serializing an object. Now let's look at deserializing an object. If I scroll up, let's finish this handle open. So handle open is going to be similar to handle save. We're going to have a file chooser, and look what we're using. We're using the stage. That's why it's important that we pass the stage over to the controller in the start method. Coming back to the controller, we're going to make sure the file doesn't equal to null. So we want to make sure they selected a file. As long as they selected a file, then we're going to try to read that file. Okay, so in the try block, I'm going to use a file input stream. Okay, earlier we used a file output stream. If I scroll down, here's a file output stream. And now I'm using a file input stream because we're going to open up the file and read that in to the program. So I'll call this file in. I need to instantiate the object. So I'll put file input stream, and file input stream needs a path. So I'm going to get the path that the user selected from the file chooser. And then guess what I'm going to use? Object input stream instead of object output stream. If I scroll down, you'll see I have object output stream down below when I was saving the file. When I'm opening the file, I'm going to use object input stream. So I'll call that in. Okay, in and out. Not sure if you ever heard of In-N-Out Burger. It's one of my favorite places to eat. Okay, and guess what object input stream needs? It needs an input stream reader. So I'll put file in there. And then it's simple. It's a pre-built method. I'm going to say person, which is my global variable, is equal to object input stream, and they have a read object method. Now look what this method returns. Read object returns an object. It throws an IO exception and a class not found exception, which I have down below. So I've already handled the exceptions. But it returns an object. Person is not an object. So if I write this method and leave it alone, you'll see I get a compile error. How can I put an object into a person? Now I can put a person into an object because object is the superclass. So that's going to be implicit casting. But now I'm going down the tree. How can I put an object into a person? Remember the saying, a person is an object, but not all objects are people. Okay, it's very important. So I can go up the tree, but going down the tree, it's not allowed. It's incompatible. But I can use an explicit cast. So I can say to the compiler, I promise that whatever the user is going to select, whatever object they read in is going to be a person. So I'm making a promise to the compiler that whenever I read this object in, it's going to be of type person. And if it's not, then I'll get a runtime error. Okay, I'll get a runtime error. So I may get some exception here. Now, after I read this in, I want the user to be able to remain where they left off. Before I do that, let's close up the files. These are very important. You got to close these files up. Otherwise, you'll have a memory leak. Every time you open up a file, you need to make sure you close it. Now, once the files are closed, I have the object, and I want the user to remain where they left off. So if I scroll down, I built a method here. I have create person from form data, which we went over before. I also have fill form data from person. So you see this takes a person object or an object of type person. And then you'll see I have my first name text field, last name text field, age text field, and the combo box. I'll set the text from the person's first name. I'll set this text from the person's last name. I'll get the age, but the text field is a string. So I need to take the integer class and convert the int to a string. So I'll call the toString method. And then I'll set the combo box's value to whatever the person's gender is. Okay, so I can set the value as well. You'll see this is very easy to do, whereas getting the values was a little bit more difficult. Okay, because when I try to parse a string, there could be some exceptions there. If it's not a valid integer, then I need to be able to catch those errors. So if I go back to the final project requirements, you see it says exception and error handling. Well, that's occurring here. Okay, so I have my exception handling when I'm trying to serialize and deserialize an object. And I'm also doing a little bit of error handling here. if age was not an int, then I actually display the error to the user. Now I can do this with a try catch. I can also do this with an if. So I can see what they've typed in. I could do a regular expression, check the string, make sure they're all numbers, make sure they're all digits. Okay, I can do the same here when they do their first name. Parse the string, maybe do a regular expression or use some of the built-in string classes and make sure whatever they typed as the first name are all characters. Make sure there's no numbers there. So reading the object is a little bit harder. Now we know everything's perfect because I've already serialized the object. When I serialize the object, I already did my error checking. So now once I read in that object, I know it's already good to go. So I can just fill in the form directly. So that's what I'm going to use right here. I'm going to use fill form from person. I'm going to pass the person object we just created after we deserialize the object. Okay, you'll see file not found. That's going to go to the file input stream. Then I have IO exception, okay, which is going to be for the object input stream, and also the class not found, which is when I'm reading the object. So let's say I read the object in, and that class that we're trying to convert it to does not exist. Okay, so let's say we're trying to convert it to a person, but person doesn't exist. So there could be a possibility that the class is not found. Now, if I open up this one, class not found, you'll see its superclass is exception. Earlier, file not found superclass was IO exception. So if that were true with class not found, I would need to put it before IO exception. But since class not found has no relationship to IO exception, the order of these two does not matter. Okay, if I was down here and I put file not found after IO exception, then it would never be used. Okay, so you got to be really careful with the order of these catch statements. You want to put the subclasses first and the superclasses later. So see, IO exception is a superclass of file not found. So when I hover over this error, it says, hey, this catch statement has already been caught, and this catch statement will never execute. So that's why you put the subclass at the top and then the superclass below. But for class not found, it has no relationship. So it can be after or before IO exception. Okay, let's see if this works. If I run this project, we've already serialized the file. Let's go ahead and try to read it in. So if I click on open and I click on person.ser for serialization, open it up. Boom, look at that. All the corresponding information. When we opened up the serialization file, we couldn't read it, but it doesn't matter. As long as the program understands what's in that file, that's all that matters. Now I have some students, they'll do a bunch of class notes, or they'll have a bunch of data. Let's say they're playing a game and they have 5 users. They want to store all the users' information. Well, then you could create either 5 different serialization files, or you can put it all into one file and maybe you have it separated by a space. So if I open up the serialization file, maybe one line is one object. Okay, so maybe one line is one object. You'll see here that's actually on 2 lines. So I have the object information and then I actually have the values. So I can do maybe 2 lines is one object and then the next 2 lines is another object. So if you need to store multiple objects, it can be done. You can also have a separation. So maybe that's an object that's separated by a dash or a special character that's not used. Maybe 3 periods. Then you have the next object. And then you have 3 periods or 4 periods or whatever you want to use. So it is possible to write multiple objects to one file. And look how easy that was. Okay, look how easy that was. I use the built-in methods. I can serialize and deserialize a file, which meets several requirements. It meets the save and load data. It also meets the exception handling. And if you read the user's inputs correctly, it'll also handle the error handling. Okay, making sure their age is actually a number, making sure their name is actually a string. Now, what happens if you have some data here? So if I go back to person, let's say I want to save first name, last name, age, and gender, but let's say I have some private information like social security number. And let's say I'm making an API where you make a request to my API and I give you the person's info, but I don't want to give out social security numbers. How can we handle that situation? Stick with Professor Wergeles and I'll show you in the next video.